He kissed another woman right on the sunlit boulevard, and in that moment, all of Hollywood trembled with him. Amelia Hayes, 7 months pregnant, thought she was living in a Beverly Hills paradise. Her husband, Ethan Sterling, a multi-millionaire film industry titan, was hailed as Hollywood's golden man. But when she saw him lock lips passionately with a young actress, her heart shattered, and a storm of power was unleashed. Because Amelia wasn't just a betrayed wife. She was the daughter of Alistair Hayes, the media mogul with the power to erase a star's name overnight. And now, Ethan was about to learn what it meant to be devoured by the very stage that had lifted him to glory. The Sterling Hayes mansion nestled on the slopes of Beverly Hills, a pristine white architectural marvel opening to a glittering view of Los Angeles below. It wasn't just a house. It was a statement of a perfect life, where every room was decorated as if waiting for a camera lens to glide through. In the marble-tiled kitchen, crystal glasses sparkled under the glow of high ceilings. The infinity pool cast a shimmering blue reflection into the valley. And in the upstairs bedroom, Amelia Hayes often sat for hours by the window, her hands cradling her rounded belly, feeling the tiny kicks of her unborn child. At 28, she had everything a young woman in the city of dreams could desire. Radiant beauty, natural grace, and above all, a powerful multi-millionaire husband, Ethan Sterling. He was Hollywood's celebrated producer, the man who had brought 3 golden Oscars to Sterling Studios. Together, they graced the red carpet like a flawless pair, her couture gown hugging her figure, Ethan's hand firmly holding hers, his smile reflecting 1,000 camera flashes. They weren't characters in a movie. They were the definition of one. But the shiniest golden cage often hides the coldest iron bars. Amelia, once a financial analyst, never abandoned her habit of monitoring expenses. One afternoon, while reviewing credit card statements, she spotted an unfamiliar name, the Mercer Hotel in West Hollywood, with charges ranging from $900 to $35,000 in a single weekend. She frowned slightly. At the time, Ethan had said he was in New York on business, constantly calling to rave about meetings with directors, sending photos of Manhattan's skyline from a rented penthouse. There was no way he'd been at a boutique hotel 10 minutes from home. When Amelia gently brought up the charges, Ethan waved it off, his eyes glued to a script on his iPad. "Just a billing error. I'll have my assistant look into it." His voice was sweet but hollow. To the public, Ethan was a master persuader, but to Amelia, his explanation fell flat on the cold hardwood floor, heavy and silent. A week later, she noticed another detail. Ethan returned from a meeting with investors, his expensive blazer carrying a scent that wasn't hers. It was white florals, youthful, the kind of perfume favored by 20-something women in Hollywood. As she approached, loosening his tie, the scent wrapped around her senses like a scratch. "Probably from the restaurant," Ethan said, kissing her forehead lightly. Another excuse, stacked on a shelf with countless others. At night, as the city lit up like a galaxy, Amelia noticed a new habit in her husband. His phone was always face down on the table. Texts arrived at midnight, forcing him to step out onto the balcony to take calls, his voice low and urgent. She lay still in the dark, her hands on her belly, feeling her daughter's heartbeat beneath her taut skin. In the opulent mansion, Ethan's whispers were like thin blades, slicing through her peace. Then came the fateful day. On a crisp morning, Amelia had just left her prenatal appointment in Santa Monica when she spotted Ethan a few streets away. He didn't know she was watching. Under the golden sunlight of Sunset Boulevard, Ethan stood close to a brunette, her slender frame alluring in a bold-cut black dress. His hands brushed a stray lock of hair from her face, a gesture so intimate it stung. Then, without hesitation, he leaned down and gave her a deep, passionate kiss, in broad daylight, under the gaze of the entire city. The sounds around Amelia vanished. The honking cars, the murmurs, the vibrant pulse of Los Angeles all sucked out of her ears. Only that moment remained the husband who had vowed to love her, who had placed his hand on her belly and called their baby, our little legacy, now giving a fiery kiss to another. She stood frozen, her hand gripping her bag strap, her eyes following as they slipped into a sleek sports car. Each step they took crushed another piece of her heart. On the drive back to the mansion, Los Angeles lost its luster. The Hollywood hills, the neon billboards, The stars embedded in the sidewalk all seemed to mock her. When Amelia stepped into the home that had once symbolized happiness, she saw only the framed wedding photos from Tuscany, the red carpet snapshots, the frozen smiles. They were all just posters for a fraudulent film. That night, Ethan returned as if nothing had happened, talking about a new script, kissing her cheek quickly. Amelia listened, smiled, but inside, she had become someone else. She was no longer Amelia, the dutiful wife. She was the daughter of Alistair Hayes, the man who ruled an entire media empire. And more than anyone, she knew, before entering a battle, you must know the entire terrain. In the marble-tiled bathroom of the Beverly Hills mansion, Amelia sat motionless, the cold white light reflecting off the mirror, making her pale face seem even more foreign. Outside, the Santa Ana winds whistled through the palm trees, rattling the glass doors faintly. She pressed her hand to her belly, feeling the steady rhythm of her baby. That small piece was the only anchor keeping her from collapsing. She recalled a night years ago when Alistair Hayes, her stern but steadfast father, had slipped a business card into her hand. It bore only a name and a phone number. "You'll never need it," he had said, "but if darkness ever comes, this is your key to escape." Today, Amelia knew that darkness had arrived. She dialed the number. On the other end was a gruff, curt voice, steady and resolute. Frank Miller, a former New York cop turned Los Angeles private investigator, now a legend in Hollywood's underground. He wasn't flashy, made no promises. He only asked, "Name?" "Ethan Sterling," Amelia replied, her voice eerily calm. "And the woman?" "Chloe Vance, a young actress, recently starred in one of Ethan's films." No tears, no complaints. Amelia laid it out like a CEO planning a hostile takeover. Clear, methodical. Miller listened, then said only, "1 week. I'll get you everything you need. But brace yourself, it's going to be worse than you think." 7 days later, the doorbell rang. A plain brown package, no return address, was delivered to her hands. Inside, a USB drive and a handwritten note. "Sorry, full evidence. F. M." Amelia sat before her laptop in the library, the dark screen reflecting her bloodshot but steely eyes. She plugged in the USB, and folders began to appear. Each was labeled by date, spanning the past 8 months. The first photo, Ethan and Chloe in a secluded corner at Chateau Marmont, their heads tilted close, smiling like a scene from a romance film. Next, a Tiffany receipt, a half-carat diamond necklace, a Hermes bag with Ethan's name on the bill. None of it ever gifted to Amelia. Then came the photos from the Mercer Hotel. Ethan with his arm around Chloe as they entered, then leaving after a night. Hidden cameras captured every intimate glance, every subtle touch. Amelia swallowed hard but kept her face impassive. She opened the final folder. Inside was an audio file, crystal clear. Chloe's voice, soft but sharp, rang out. "What about Amelia? The baby's coming soon." And then, Ethan's low laugh, a sound that chilled Amelia's blood. "Amelia has everything she needs. The baby just secures my place with Alistair. Once the new fund closes, I'll deal with her. A nuisance. Handled." Amelia paused the playback, sitting in silence. Each word sank into her bones, turning into sharp blades. The man who had whispered sweet promises in her ear now spoke of her as an investment, a contract to be liquidated. The room was still, only the hum of the air conditioner audible. Outside, Los Angeles buzzed on, but within Amelia, a quiet storm was forming. No more doubts, no more waiting. Ethan hadn't just betrayed her in love, he'd treated her as a tool to climb higher in the Hayes empire. That night, Amelia didn't cry. She didn't scream or smash anything. Instead, she opened her laptop again, pulling up a photo of Ethan and Chloe kissing outside the Mercer Hotel. She set it on the screen, letting it wait. When Ethan returned, the door swung open, his briefcase slipping from his hand as his eyes locked on the glowing screen. For a moment, the air in the room froze. A movie was about to begin, but this time, Amelia was no longer the audience. The Beverly Hills mansion glowed with the soft golden light of evening. Crystal chandeliers sparkled as if everything were still normal, as if the world hadn't cracked. But in the sprawling living room, where abstract paintings hung neatly and the fireplace burned a vivid red, the air was heavy, like a stage about to drop its curtain. On the polished coffee table, the laptop sat open, its screen still glowing. The image was stark, Ethan Sterling, beaming, his lips pressed against Chloe Vance's outside the Mercer Hotel. It wasn't a suspicion anymore. It was a dagger straight to the chest. The front door swung open. Ethan stepped in, his expensive suit rumpled after a long day. He set his briefcase on the sofa, moved forward, then stopped dead. His eyes were glued to the screen. In that moment, everything else vanished. Only he and the naked evidence remained. "Amelia," his voice caught, his eyes flickering with panic. He tried to summon his usual confident demeanor, but his lips trembled. It's not what you think." Amelia sat motionless in the armchair across from him, her back straight, her hands resting on her belly as if shielding the tiny angel inside. She didn't scream, didn't cry. Her voice was soft but icy, like a thin blade slicing through the facade. "This is the life you've been living behind my back for 8 months, Ethan." A thick silence enveloped the room. Then Ethan launched into a flurry of excuses. He said Chloe was just a colleague. He blamed Amelia's pregnancy hormones for her delusions. He mentioned work texts, stressful evenings. Each word, each phrase, was like jagged bricks hastily stacked into a wall. But that wall crumbled the moment Amelia pressed the spacebar on the laptop. "Dear audience, grab a glass of water, take a moment to relax, and keep listening to the story. The twists are still to come. And please drop a comment below letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always a joy to see who's joining us from around the world. Drop a 1 in the comments if you find this story gripping, so we can keep bringing you more captivating tales." The sound rang out, low and arrogant. Ethan's voice, recorded crystal clear. "Amelia has everything she needs. The baby just secures my place with Alistair. Once the new fund closes, I'll deal with her. A nuisance. Handled." The sound echoed in the quiet room, bouncing off the glass walls, then crashing onto the hardwood floor. Ethan froze, his face ashen, shifting from anger to panic, then despair. "Amelia, please listen to me." He took a step toward her, his trembling hand outstretched. "I messed up. A stupid, meaningless mistake. But you and the baby, you're everything. We can fix this. Please, don't tell your father. Please." Amelia stood. Her eyes glistened but were no longer soft. She placed a hand on her belly, as if raising a shield between her and the betrayer. For the first time, she looked at Ethan not as a wife, but as a prosecutor facing a defendant. "You're not afraid of losing me," she said slowly, her voice resonating. "You're only afraid of losing my father's power. You don't love me. You used me to climb higher." Ethan shook his head, desperate. "No, Amelia, I love you. Enough." Her voice cut through, sharp and cold. "I heard you speak for yourself, and I trust my own ears more than any words from you." Amelia turned, walking straight toward the hallway. Each step echoed on the floor like a drum roll signaling the start of a show. She shut the bedroom door behind her, locking it, leaving Ethan alone in the vast living room. In the quiet darkness, Amelia sat in the chair by the bed, picking up her phone. The screen lit up, displaying a single name, Dad. Her fingers moved slowly but decisively. The phone rang a few times before a deep, commanding voice answered on the other end. "Alistair Hayes." Amelia's voice caught, but she maintained an eerie calm. "Dad." A single tear rolled down, landing on her hand. "I need you to come home." Half a world away, in a luxurious hotel meeting room in Cannes, where Alistair was negotiating a billion-dollar media deal, his world suddenly shrank. Only his daughter's trembling voice remained. He stood abruptly, leaving stunned negotiators behind, saying only, "My plane leaves in 30 minutes. If you want this deal, sign it now. I'm gone." 16 hours later, the Beverly Hills mansion's door swung open again. But this time, it wasn't a trembling betrayer who entered, it was a true king. Alistair Hayes, 62, silver-haired, in a perfectly tailored suit, his gray-blue eyes fierce. He crossed the threshold, exuding an aura that made the room feel smaller. He didn't ask questions right away. He went straight to his daughter's room, where Amelia sat waiting, folding baby clothes with resolute hands. When she looked up, their eyes met, and they sat in silence. He enveloped her in a tight, warm embrace. No words were needed. His presence alone was enough for Amelia to feel she was no longer alone. Where is he? Alistair's voice was low, calm to a chilling degree. Amelia tilted her head toward the living room. He tried talking to me all night, apologizing, begging, but I locked the door. Good girl, he replied softly. Then his eyes darkened. Now, tell me everything. In the soft golden light of the unfinished nursery, Amelia recounted it all. The charges, the scent, the kiss on Sunset Boulevard, and finally, the USB with undeniable proof. Alistair listened, his face like carved granite. Only the slight twitch of his jaw betrayed the rage simmering within. When the recording ended, he set the tablet down. The silence that followed was more dangerous than any threat. Ethan Sterling, his voice was steady and cold, made a grave miscalculation. The Los Angeles dawn broke with a pale glow stretching across the Hollywood hills. But for Ethan Sterling, the new day wasn't a promise, it was the start of a nightmare. 9:01 a.m. An email appeared in his inbox from Western Pacific Bank, the primary financier for Sterling Studios' film projects. Subject: Urgent credit line review. The cold message stated that due to new developments and risk reassessment, the bank was immediately freezing all credit lines and demanding repayment of a $50 million bridge loan. Ethan read it over and over, his heart pounding. In the film industry, cash flow was lifeblood. $50 million wasn't just a number, it was the breath of 3 films in production, thousands of employees, and a reputation built on advances. One email, and his entire empire teetered. He called frantically, but the bank executives who once clinked champagne glasses with him at Beverly Hilton galas were now in meetings or on business trips. Doors once wide open slammed shut in his face. He didn't know that behind the scenes, a hand had pulled the strings. Alistair Hayes held strategic shares in the bank's parent conglomerate. That hand didn't need to issue direct orders. A nod was enough to turn the bank into a tool. The first blow financial had landed. That afternoon, Ethan met with a private investor, hoping to secure alternative funding. But at the Four Seasons lobby, when he extended his hand, the investor merely nodded and withdrew. Familiar faces that once sought him out for photos now avoided his gaze. A text flashed on his phone. Variety reported, Ethan Sterling withdraws from Children's Film Fund Board. The brief article was enough to signal he was no longer welcome in the charitable community he'd once used to polish his image. That evening, Ethan still donned his tuxedo, attending a fundraising gala. But as he entered, conversations hushed. On the seating chart, his name was crossed out, replaced by another producer. Old colleagues gave curt nods and turned away. In that glamorous space, he was a ghost, an outcast from the stage he once dominated. The second blow social had encircled him. And then, when Ethan returned home, thinking things couldn't get worse, she appeared. Not Alistair, but Eleanor Vance, Hollywood's most ruthless divorce lawyer. She arrived with a thick file, her eyes cold as someone who had crushed dozens of multi-million-dollar estates at the negotiating table. The prenuptial agreement Ethan had once dismissed now became a blade at his throat. It had a clear infidelity clause. Any act of betrayal would strip him of access to Amelia's assets and require him to repay all financial gifts during the marriage. With the mountain of evidence on the USB, the case was airtight. Your company, Eleanor said slowly, was founded with startup capital from the Hayes Family Trust. Legally, it's part of the marital estate, and you've breached the terms. Her voice rang in the room like a judge's gavel. Ethan's jaw dropped. His mind raced with numbers. The studio, the house, the investment accounts, all at risk of vanishing. When he signed that prenup, he thought it was a mere formality, a condition to ease Amelia's mind. Now, it was a shackle locking his future. The third blow, legal, closed the vise. In 24 hours, 3 simultaneous strikes. The bank froze him, society turned its back, and the law tightened its grip. Ethan Sterling, who once strode proudly on the red carpet, now slumped in his office, head buried in his hands. The movie posters lining the walls, once his pride, now felt like mocking tombstones. He didn't know who to hate first, Amelia, for daring to fight back, or Alistair, for wielding power like a storm that obliterated everything. But deep down, he knew this wasn't bad luck. This was a campaign, a meticulously orchestrated, coldly precise symphony. In another room of the mansion, Amelia sat by the window, her hand resting lightly on her belly. Outside, Los Angeles glowed, but she no longer saw it as a glamorous land. To her, it was merely the stage for a power game her father was directing. And for the first time, Amelia felt she wasn't drowning in pain. She stood on the side of power not as a pawn, but as a force being protected. Ethan, on the other hand, felt the isolation closing in, as if the city's light had drained from the house. Every desperate call went unanswered. Those who once applauded him now whispered behind his back. In a single day, he had gone from Hollywood's golden man to a cursed outcast. Tuesday morning, Los Angeles woke to a clear sky after a night of rain, fresh sunlight pouring down Sunset Boulevard. But in Sterling's opulent apartment, another light had just exploded. The light of a headline splashed across newsstands, phone screens, and morning broadcasts. Variety's front page: Ethan Sterling $1 million producer or box office fraud. Below it, Deadline broke an urgent story. SEC opens investigation into Sterling Studios for suspected financial fraud. Within an hour, his name flooded social media. But this time, it wasn't paired with red carpets or award ceremonies, but with cold hashtags: number Sterling scandal, number fake producer, number studio collapse. The Variety article was a masterfully crafted character assassination. It didn't mention the affair unnecessary. Instead, it dissected every link in the Sterling Studios empire: over-leveraged loans, opaque partnerships, and orchestrated fake profits to lure investors. Quotes from anonymous sources, actually Alistair's old allies, emerged, all expressing grave concerns about Ethan's leadership and mental stability. Each sentence was a precise stab at his weakest point: his reputation. By noon, as Ethan stepped out of his car at Sterling Studios headquarters, reporters swarmed, microphones thrust toward him, questions relentless. How do you respond to allegations of defrauding investors? Is it true the SEC has summoned you? Was Amelia Hayes aware of these actions? Camera flashes blazed, their harsh light burning like fire on his skin. Ethan, who once strode confidently on red carpets, now shielded his face, head bowed, pushing through the crowd like a fugitive. In his office, the phone rang incessantly. Panicked investors demanded immediate withdrawals. His assistant reported that multiple partners had canceled contracts. An email from the SEC formally demanded all financial records of Sterling Studios within 7 days. For a company already choked by a frozen credit line, this was a death sentence. But the storm didn't stop at finances. That night, the annual Children's Health Fund Gala took place at the Beverly Hilton. Ethan had been co-chair, a poster boy. But when he arrived, the program had been reprinted, his name erased, replaced by a prominent philanthropist. As he entered the hall, cold smiles greeted him. Old friends gave curt nods and turned away, as if his presence were a stain. He stood there, in his expensive tuxedo, but the eyes around him treated him like a carrier of a contagious disease. The lively music, the clinking glasses, it all became a deafening silence to Ethan. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Amelia was welcomed as a new icon. Alistair had whisked her to a Malibu hotel, guarded tightly, cared for meticulously. Simultaneously, he fast-tracked the creation of the Hollywood Cares for Mothers and Children Fund, with Amelia as its face. The media buzzed. Amelia Hayes, from the shadow of betrayal to the light of compassion. Images of her, pregnant and smiling gently, spread across social media. The contrast was brutal. As Ethan was cast as the villain, Amelia became the heroine. In the days that followed, the storm escalated. The Hollywood Reporter ran a feature, "The Fall of Sterling," a warning to the industry. CNBC dissected the company's finances, stating, "Sterling Studios wasn't a studio, it was a sandcastle on the shore." And to seal the deal, the Los Angeles Times published an editorial. "In a city where everything is an illusion, Ethan Sterling was the greatest illusion of all." Each article was a dagger, and the world watched the execution like a blockbuster premiere. But the star wasn't on stage, he was strung up on a pillory. In his apartment, Ethan stumbled about, unshaven, eyes vacant. The phone rang constantly, but no longer with friends, only reporters, lawyers, and creditors. He wanted to fight back, to scream that it was all a conspiracy. But deep down, he knew the truth. His own foolish betrayal had handed his enemies the weapon. One night, alone in his darkened office, He looked out at the glittering city below. The neon Hollywood signs still shone, but to him, it was a mocking caption. Game over. He whispered to himself, voice hoarse. This isn't a downfall. This is an execution. The Los Angeles night hung heavy. In a cold rented apartment by the river in downtown, Ethan Sterling sat alone, the pale blue glow of his laptop screen reflecting on his gaunt, stubbled face. Before him were dozens of open browser tabs, old articles from the 1,990 seconds, dusty financial forums, and a nearly forgotten anonymous blog. For weeks, he'd been on a desperate hunt. Not to save Sterling Studios, he knew it was dead. He was after something else. A crack in Alistair Hayes' armor. And then, Ethan thought he'd found it. Marcus Thorne, the founder of a major shipping company, whose business was taken over by Hayes in a hostile acquisition in 1993. Weeks later, Thorne took his own life in his office. Back then, the media called it the personal tragedy of a failed entrepreneur. But on an old financial forum, a user claiming to be Thorne's former associate alleged that Alistair had used illegal tactics, bribery, intimidation, and political manipulation to seize the company. A relic of the internet, a glimmer of hope. Ethan printed everything, compiling a thick file. In his mind, this was his last card. Expose this, and the king, Hayes, would fall, and he, the crushed man, would take the throne down with him. He contacted a middleman lawyer, sending a message. I have information on Marcus Thorne. Pass it to Alistair. He'll want to hear this. And, surprisingly, Alistair agreed to meet. The private library of Hayes Global Tower, 30th floor. A timeless space amid modernity. Mahogany-paneled walls, a marble fireplace, rare manuscripts lining the shelves. The golden firelight flickered on Alistair's cold face. A king awaiting a traitor's entrance. Ethan appeared, clutching his leather briefcase like a lifeline. His suit was crumpled, his eyes marked by sleeplessness. He set the briefcase on the coffee table, opening it with a dramatic flourish. Marcus Thorne, he said, his voice hoarse but straining for triumph. I know the truth. I have articles, testimony, and a witness ready to talk to the SEC, the New York Times. The world will know your empire was built on others' blood. He pushed the file toward Alistair, his breathing heavy, like a man who'd just thrown his final punch. We can settle this privately. Let me walk away, and I disappear. If not, your legacy burns. For a few seconds, Alistair was silent. Then, instead of anger, his lips curved into a thin, icy smile. He lifted his whiskey glass, swirled it, took a sip, and set it on the fireplace mantel with a soft clink that echoed through the room. That's it? He asked, his voice tinged with pity. That's your final move? Ethan frowned. You think I'm bluffing? Alistair turned, his eyes gleaming like polished steel. Your mistake, Ethan, is that you read the headlines but never the fine print. Did you think I let 30 years pass without preparing for this day? He pressed a button on his tablet. A wooden wall panel slid open, revealing a large screen showing a live feed of a conference hall below. Hundreds of reporters, cameras, and microphones waited. The Hayes Global logo dominated the backdrop. Ethan stared. What is this? My press conference, Alistair replied. You thought you came here to blackmail me. In truth, you've just handed me a perfect story to tell the world. He paced the room slowly, his voice steady as a drumbeat. Marcus Thorne was no noble victim. He was an embezzler. I have forensic reports from 1,994 proving he siphoned millions for gambling in Monaco. His suicide? Not because of me, but because the FBI was about to indict him. And your witness, Paul Ziegler? He's living comfortably in the Caymans, thanks to a pension I provide. One Christmas call a year keeps him loyal. Ethan trembled. The file before him, weeks of effort, turned to dust in a few sentences. Alistair leaned in, whispering like a verdict. You brought a knife to a nuclear massacre, Ethan. And you didn't even know where you were standing. He gestured to the screen, where an MC was introducing him to the stage. In 5 minutes, I'll stand before the press, telling the Marcus Thorne story as a painful lesson that made me more humane. I'll announce a new $100 million mental health center for executives in Thorne's name. Tomorrow's headlines won't talk about scandal. They'll talk about redemption, compassion, and the Hayes legacy. Thank you for giving me the opportunity. Ethan collapsed into the chair, his face ashen. His body shook like a marionette with cut strings. Alistair hadn't just neutralized his attack, he'd turned it into a jewel for his crown. "You'll get nothing," Alistair said, his voice dry. "You'll be forgotten. You're just a footnote in my greater story." But the door opened. 2 security guards stepped in. Alistair turned away, not bothering to look back. "Escort the guest out." Ethan was dragged from the room, through the red-carpeted hallway, and tossed out like a beggar. Behind him, applause roared from the conference hall below, like a triumphal anthem for an untouchable empire. Los Angeles still glowed at night, its neon signs and new movie posters lining the boulevards. But for Ethan Sterling, that light was now a blade in his eyes. A cheap rented apartment in a forgotten corner of Jersey City, where he fled after everything collapsed, was as chaotic as the wreckage of his life. Bills piled up, cheap liquor spilled on the table. His Armani suit hung sloppily on a chair, no different from a discarded costume. Ethan, once a symbol of success, now saw only a ravaged stranger in the mirror. Sterling Studios had filed for bankruptcy. Bank accounts were frozen. Friends vanished. Those who once flocked to him in Beverly Hills now avoided him like a plague. No one answered his calls. The world had erased him like a smudge from a page. One night, he stood on the small balcony, gazing at Manhattan's twinkling skyline in the distance. He whispered to himself, "Nothing left, just me." But even that was swept away by the wind, leaving no trace. Meanwhile, another life was blooming. Amelia Hayes, now in her final month of pregnancy, lived in a high-end suite at a Malibu hotel, protected by her father's discreet security circle. Each morning, sunlight flooded through the glass, bathing the room in gold. Amelia, instead of sinking into bitterness, found strength in creating something new, the Hayes Fund, for mothers and children. She met with doctors, researchers, and young families. For the first time, Amelia felt she was no longer Ethan Sterling's wife, or Alistair Hayes' daughter. She was herself a mother-to-be, a woman turning pain into action. Each time she touched her belly, she felt a new vitality, not just her baby's, but her own. In her eyes, betrayal was no longer a crushing shadow, but a fire that had burned away the golden cage, letting her rise from the ashes. The fateful day arrived. At Cedars-Sinai Hospital, in a room bathed in warm light, Amelia gave birth to a healthy girl, weighing 7 pounds 2 ounces. She named her Lily Rose Hayes. Alistair was there. The man who had been a ruthless king in the boardroom now held his granddaughter in hands that once made the financial world tremble. He looked at Amelia, her face radiant despite exhaustion, and whispered, "She's perfect. You did it, Amelia." Amelia smiled, not the smile of a survivor, but of a victor. In her eyes was a new peace, one no throne could buy. And Ethan? He wasn't there. News of Lily's birth reached him through a brief online article sent by an old friend out of pity. He looked at the photo, Amelia smiling, her father beside her, Lily sleeping in her arms. A perfect family portrait where he had been erased, as if he never existed. Ethan closed his phone, his hand trembling. He didn't know whether to cry or laugh. Everything he once believed was his legacy now belonged to someone else. The child he called a nuisance had become the center of a new empire, one of love, not deceit. He sat alone in the dark, whispering, "Maybe this is the real sentence, to be forgotten." That night, Amelia stood by the hospital window, holding Lily in her arms. The city stretched out below, twinkling like a second sky. For months, that view had symbolized deceit. Now, it was the backdrop for a new beginning. "You'll grow up in a different world, Lily," she whispered. "A world your mother will help you build, with truth, with love, not lies." And in that moment, Amelia knew. She was no longer the victim of this story. She was the one writing its next chapter. The story of Amelia Hayes, Ethan Sterling, and Alistair Hayes isn't just the tragedy of a broken marriage. It's a powerful reminder that every choice has a price, and the cost of betrayal is sometimes not just losing a woman, but awakening the wrath of an entire empire. Ethan learned the bitterest lesson. Love cannot be bought with ambition, and loyalty cannot be faked. Meanwhile, Amelia, from a betrayed wife, rose up, found strength in her pain, and turned it into a legacy for her daughter. And Alistair, once again, proved that power lies not just in money, but in the ability to rewrite the story on his terms. But a question lingers. Was Alistair's vengeance truly just, or did he go too far? He protected his daughter, but also buried a man to ashes. Somewhere, Hayes's old enemies still wait for their chance. And perhaps, the ghosts of the past will return to challenge not just Alistair, but Amelia, who now carries the weight of a new legacy. So, what do you think? If you were Amelia, would you forgive Ethan? If you were Alistair, would you strike so ruthlessly? Leave your thoughts in the comments below, share your perspective, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel to catch the next part of the story. Because this is only the end of one chapter and the door to the next has just cracked open.
Camera flashes fired wildly as Jason Whitman strode forward like a king, hand in hand with his young mistress Bella. Surrounded by reporters, he thought tonight would be his sweetest display of triumph. But then the entire hall fell silent. A black Cadillac pulled up to the red carpet. Stepping out was Emily, his 6-month pregnant wife, radiant in a stunning gown, walking side by side with CEO Ryan Cole, Jason's greatest rival. The shock not only left Jason breathless, it marked the beginning of an unprecedented downfall in high society. A few months earlier, in the penthouse at the heart of Manhattan, Emily happened to find a strange receipt tucked inside a stack of mail. A small charge from a jewelry store in Soho, a place she had never set foot in. The name on the slip evoked a world she didn't belong to. Delicate chain necklaces, trendy stacked rings, completely different from her own classic taste. In an instant, Emily's heart clenched, as if pierced by a needle. Manhattan still glittered like an open-air stage, but for Emily, the city lights suddenly felt harsh, as if they were trying to conceal something. An uneasy, relentless instinct rose inside her. She knew her husband, Jason Whitman, was no stranger to sudden expenses, to extravagant gifts meant to impress the high society. But this was different. Too private, too discreet, unlike his usual ostentatious style. Emily could no longer sleep peacefully. Each night, she sat quietly by the massive glass window overlooking the glowing lights of Fifth Avenue, where the traffic streamed endlessly like a river of stars. In her hand, the cup of peppermint tea had long gone cold. A woman's intuition and that of a wife whispered that something behind the glittering facade was breaking apart. Unable to bear the torment, Emily hired a private investigator. A week later, the truth was laid on the table like a cold blade. The photographs were clear. Jason with Bella, a young Instagram model, her eyes burning with ambition to climb the ladder of fame. They held hands on the beaches of Miami, lounged by the pools of Palm Springs, even flew on the company jet to Napa Valley. Each photo was a slash, exposing the true face of the husband once celebrated as the perfect man. Emily sat frozen before the evidence. Her heart felt as though it were being crushed in a giant fist. The penthouse, once filled with laughter, now felt so cold she could hear nothing but the ticking of the Swiss clock. A part of her wanted to scream, smash things, or call Jason to confront him immediately. But instead, she simply sat there, hand cradling her belly, tears falling endlessly. Then, one morning, the pregnancy test in her hand showed 2 bright lines. The storm inside Emily stopped instantly. All the tears, all the pain, gave way to something else. Responsibility. She was going to be a mother, and this child could not grow up under the shadow of a father's betrayal. From that moment, Emily changed. She was no longer just a deceived wife. She became a mother, fighting for the future. Night after night, instead of crying, she opened her laptop, combed through documents, reread the Whitman family company charter her father had once told her about. Amid the dry legal language, she found hope. Hidden clauses about ethics, about managerial misconduct, secret doors Jason had never noticed. Every time the baby kicked gently inside her, Emily felt a new surge of strength. She whispered, "I will not let you bow your head to anyone's arrogance." The eyes staring back from the mirror were no longer those of a broken woman, but of a strategist learning to turn pain into a weapon. In the silence of the penthouse, the hum of the air conditioner became the soundtrack of her sleepless nights. She arranged the evidence, piecing together Jason's murky financial web. Each receipt, each concealed trip, became a brick in the foundation of her plan. And somewhere, In the city that never sleeps, a queen was being forged not from glittering lights, but from bitter betrayal. On Fifth Avenue, Jason was still lost in his illusion of power, cloaked in a glittering armor alongside his young mistress. Meanwhile, in a quiet room in Brooklyn, Emily sat motionless before her phone screen, her hand trembling as she dialed the number of a man she hadn't called in years, Ryan Cole. Ryan was no stranger. He had been Emily's classmate at Harvard Business School, a steadfast man, his eyes cold as steel yet radiating a rare trustworthiness. More importantly, he was Jason's intellectual rival. If Jason had built his reputation through inheritance and flashy displays, Ryan had risen from nothing, guided by sound business decisions and integrity. That contrast made him the only figure Emily could think of in her moment of despair. Their meeting was set at a small cafe in Brooklyn Heights, where warm yellow light spilled through the windows and the faint scent of waffles lingered in the air. No paparazzi, no gossip columnists, only two people who had known Jason since his earliest ambitious days. Emily appeared in a long beige coat, her features delicate but her eyes lined with sleepless shadows. She carefully recounted everything: the affair, the photographs exposing betrayal, her 6 months of pregnancy, and most importantly, how Jason was draining company funds to cover his business failures. Ryan listened, his hand resting lightly on his espresso cup, unmoving. Only when Emily stopped did he nod slowly, his gaze sharp as a scalpel. "If you truly want to fight, what you need isn't emotion, it's data. I'll help." From that moment, an alliance was born. Not just sympathy for a betrayed woman, but a strategic union of two minds who knew Jason's weaknesses better than anyone. They named their plan Project Falcon, swift, razor-sharp, and designed to strike down giants who believed themselves untouchable. In the days that followed, Emily was no longer the silent wife in the penthouse. She transformed into a tireless data analyst. Each night, the blue glow of her laptop lit her face, reflecting the determination etched into every line. On the other side, Ryan provided resources, a forensic accounting team, market analysts, even connections deep within Wall Street, all operated covertly, like falcons hidden in the night sky. For the first time, Emily felt in control of the game. Reports she once considered dry and lifeless became weapons. Every irregular number, every business trip to Napa Valley or Palm Springs, every Tiffany purchase was strung together into evidence. She annotated meticulously, marking each line as though mapping a treasure, except this treasure was the truth that could destroy Jason. Though the work was tense, moments of unexpected relief surfaced. One evening, when Ryan sent her a list of suspicious expenses, Emily chuckled softly as she read that Jason had even charged Bella's fake eyelashes to client relations. In the dark, she thought, the man who prided himself as New York's business genius, undone by a pair of lashes. The laugh was brief, but it was enough for Emily to know she no longer feared him. Each meeting with Ryan felt like a masterclass in strategy. He explained how markets reacted to bad news, how boards panicked in the face of instability, and how to exploit every loophole in corporate bylaws. Emily listened, absorbed, and gradually, she was no longer a student. She became the co-architect of a silent coup, a scenario where, if unleashed at the right moment, Jason would lose everything. The child inside her felt like a ticking clock. Every kick was a reminder. Time was running out. She had to be ready so that when the moment came, everything would erupt like a storm, leaving Jason no chance to recover. On Brooklyn's streets carpeted with fallen leaves, Emily walked beside Ryan after each secret meeting. The streetlights cast shadows across her face, revealing a transformation. No longer the weary wife abandoned, but the steel gaze of an architect building the battlefield for $1 billion war. New York winter nights felt endless. In a makeshift office in Brooklyn, the blue glow of dozens of screens illuminated Emily's face. On the desk, thick stacks of files piled high. Invoices, internal emails, bank statements. The clatter of keys filled the air, broken only by the steady hum of a printer. The room looked less like an office than a miniature war room, where a 6-month pregnant woman commanded a secret hunt. Ryan's forensic team moved like ghosts. They left no trace, only data. And the data exposed the naked truth. Jason had funneled hundreds of millions into phantom real estate projects in Nevada, empty lots that had never received building permits. Some shell companies existed only on paper, with directors whose names were pulled straight from a phone directory. Emily flipped through expense reports, her eyes halting on odd entries. A strategy conference in Las Vegas, hosted at a five-star hotel where Jason had booked a suite so large it contained a private bowling alley. In the hotel photos the team recovered, Bella appeared as the star, draped in a red gown, martini in hand, smiling radiantly beside Jason in a gold-lined pool. Every photo, every line of a bank statement sliced deeper into Emily's memory. But instead of breaking down, she underlined each entry with a red pen, marking every date and detail, stitching together a vast picture, a financial scandal that could not be denied. The turning point came when one internal email was retrieved. In it, Jason instructed his assistant to disguise massive expenses by labeling them as client development costs. The absurdity, one of those charges was the bill for Bella's haute couture dress on Rodeo Drive. Emily stared at the line, then laughed bitterly, a sharp, hollow sound. The man who once prided himself as a management mogul was finally undone by a dress. Yet what gave Emily true leverage wasn't just data. In the old safe her father had left behind, amid yellowed papers, she uncovered Whitman Group's original shareholder charter. Her late father's stern handwriting was clear. Any act that damages the company's reputation qualifies for a review of the CEO's position. For years, that clause had been dismissed as symbolic. But now, in Emily's hands, it became a drawn sword, waiting to be unsheathed. Alongside, it was her father's final gift, 15% founding shares. Jason had always treated that number as symbolic, a sentimental token for his wife. But Emily knew better. In a crisis, that stake was enough to swing open the boardroom doors. And once those doors opened, Jason would face the very people he once called allies. Day after day, Emily compiled the evidence into a thick, black book. She labeled chapters Las Vegas, Napa Valley, Bella's expenses, each chapter a bomb, ready to detonate when the time was right, shaking the Whitman empire to its core. The child in her belly kicked gently, as if reminding her that every move must be calculated. Late at night, Ryan would enter with a box of cold pizza, while Emily remained frozen at her desk, eyes fixed on the words corporate ethics. He shook his head, half joking. Jason should have studied your father's business philosophy instead of learning how to pop champagne in Vegas. Emily smiled faintly, but her eyes gleamed with steel. She knew the moment of reckoning was drawing near. Beverly Hills gleamed like a kingdom of crystal. Luxury cars lined up, gliding past the entrance of the Waldorf Hotel, where the fundraising gala had been prepared like a coronation for the elite. Jason Whitman stepped out of his Rolls-Royce, his hand gripping tightly onto Bella, the fiery young mistress in a red gown. He drew in a deep breath, savoring the flashes exploding around him, as though every light had been born just to glorify him. In that moment, Jason believed he had already won. He had the career, the wealth, and a dazzling trophy that made reporters jostle for position. Bella's arm draped lightly across his chest like a proclamation. This was the true queen. Jason smiled with pride, certain that tonight nothing could shake his throne on this stage of power. Then, the atmosphere shifted. Camera shutters stuttered. A sleek black Cadillac pulled up to the entrance. Its door opened, and out stepped Emily, Jason's legal wife, in a satin emerald gown hugging her 6-month pregnant frame. The beams from the spotlight struck hundreds of crystals on her earrings, casting a glow that held the entire hall in breathless silence. But that wasn't what made Jason's face go pale. Walking beside Emily was Ryan Cole, the CEO of Coltech, his greatest rival in the industry. The two of them strode side by side like a power couple, crossing the red carpet unfazed amid the frenzied shouts of reporters. For a fleeting moment, Jason felt the floor beneath him tremble. Emily held her head high, each step measured as if designed to drown Jason's arrogance. She smiled coldly, her gaze cutting toward Bella as she delivered a greeting wrapped in velvet but edged like a blade. That Cartier bracelet suits you. a gift I personally suggested to Jason." The words pierced Bella's chest like an arrow. Her face drained of color, her smile vanished, and the arm clutching Jason quivered. The crowd gasped, whispers rippling through the grand hall. Jason choked, his throat dry. Before he could recover, Emily landed a second blow. "My husband just took out the trash. Sorry if I interrupted your evening." The hall erupted, stifled laughter mixed with the rapid-fire clicks of cameras. In seconds, the image of Jason and Bella dissolved. Every spotlight turned to Emily and Ryan. The gala Jason had orchestrated to flaunt his triumph had transformed into a public stage for his wife's declaration of war. Jason tried to force a smile, but panic carved itself into his face. Bella shrank behind him, lips trembling, while Emily stood tall, serene as a queen, one hand resting lightly on her belly, the other draped effortlessly on Ryan's arm, the emblem of a new alliance. That night, the headlines weren't about the charity project or the jewelry collection Bella was promoting. Every bold print revolved around a single name, Emily Whitman. The woman who had seemed to fade into the background now emerged, not just to assert her presence, but to ignite the flame that signaled the beginning of a power war unlike any the high society had ever seen. 3 days after the chaotic gala in Beverly Hills, Manhattan was cloaked in tension. On the top floor of the Whitman Group headquarters, the glass-walled boardroom resembled an arena that required no bloodshed. Antique paintings hung in perfect symmetry, a long mahogany table gleamed, leather chairs lined up in order, all exuding solemnity, but also the feeling of an execution about to take place. Jason entered first. The expensive suit could no longer disguise the tremor in his stride. His eyes were sunken, his smile forced, as he struggled to revive the image of a powerful leader. But every footstep on the polished wood floor sounded like a gavel striking, reminding him that his throne was shaking. Then the doors opened again. Emily walked in, not in the emerald satin gown from the red carpet night, but in a sharply tailored gray suit. The precise seams hugged her pregnant frame, turning her into a figure both resolute and profoundly human. In her hand was a thick, red-bound file, neatly marked with notes. No smile, no unnecessary glance, only a silence that itself was a declaration. She stood before the large screen. The first slide lit up, a massive number, $500 million. The board murmured in unease. Emily began, her voice cold and firm. The financial report revealed line by line, $500 million lost, company expenses up 40% from fake business trips, and key executives resigning in droves within a year. Each figure came with an image. The second slide showed Bella lounging by a Las Vegas pool, cocktail in hand. The third, a haute couture receipt from Rodeo Drive, labeled Client Relations. The fourth, an internal email from Jason instructing his assistant to legitimize the expenses. With every click, the room sank deeper into a paralyzed silence. The board members, those who once toasted champagne with Jason, now sat frozen, their eyes fixed on him, mingling shock with fury. A few faces lowered, as if to avoid the truth blazing across the screen. And then, Ryan Cole appeared via video call. The screen at the head of the table lit up, revealing the calm face of Jason's rival CEO. Ryan spoke little. He offered to acquire 51% of the tech division, the only solution to halt the stock price plummeting by the hour. Figures, terms, and benefits were laid out clearly, like a lifeline tossed into a sea of crisis. Jason shot to his feet, shouting. He pointed at Emily, voice breaking. This was conspiracy, betrayal. But his words rang hollow in the vast room, like echoes bouncing off the glass walls. Emily did not move. When the shouting faded, she opened the file and drew out the original shareholder charter, her father's signed copy. Her voice was calm, steady. I am not taking anything from you. I am only protecting what belongs to my child. The words fell like a judge's gavel. The board had no defense left for Jason. Every gaze now turned to Emily, no longer as a silent wife, but as a founding shareholder executing her rightful authority. In the heavy air, Jason looked like a dethroned king, collapsing into his chair, hands covering his head. Beyond the glass walls, Manhattan still roared with life. But inside that room, everything had changed. A new era had begun. In just 72 hours, everything Jason once held turned to ash. On the first morning after the fateful meeting, an urgent statement was released. Jason Whitman was officially suspended from his position as CEO. The cold digital signatures of the board of directors appeared across every newspaper, like a sentence that could not be appealed. His bank accounts were frozen, his extravagant lines of credit suddenly silenced. He stared at the balance reduced to zero, eyes bloodshot, fingers trembling in disbelief. Bella disappeared almost instantly. The woman who once clung to his arm on the red carpet left behind only a single line: "You have nothing left for me to hold on to." On Instagram, her account abruptly turned private, erasing every photo flaunting trips to Vegas and Miami. Jason read the message again and again, half laughing, half choking, bitterly realizing that the love he had traded his family for only existed as long as his credit cards remained open. Meanwhile, the press exploded with headlines. Millionaire falls from grace. Photos of him screaming in the boardroom leaked and spread across Twitter, turning into a public joke. Memes mocking Jason sprouted everywhere, from CEO of Bella Incorporated to the king of client expenses. Once, he had reveled in the spotlight. Now, that light had become a torch, burning his reputation to the ground. On the second day, he tried to enter Whitman Group headquarters. The glass doors gleamed as always, but his access card no longer worked. The security guard, who once bowed to him each morning, now casually opened the door by hand as a bare courtesy. That nod held no respect, only pity laced with indifference. Jason walked through the lobby, the echo of his shoes hollow and sharp. Each step was a blade, reminding him the throne was gone. On the third day, when he returned to his Fifth Avenue penthouse, the eviction envelope was waiting. The bold letters stabbed at his eyes. The property had always belonged to Emily's family trust, never truly his. The walls that had seen countless lavish parties were now cold, the sofas empty, the half-finished champagne bottles still sitting on the bar like a mocking relic. Jason collapsed in the center of the room, his hands gripping his head. The ticking of the wall clock filled the silence, as though counting down. Tears spilled not from rage this time, but from emptiness. Years spent building the image of a real estate king had left nothing but a solitary man in a castle of his own, making a castle built on sand. For a fleeting moment he thought about calling Emily, but his hand froze above the phone. Call to say what? To beg for forgiveness? To plead for a second chance? Such words had never existed in his vocabulary, and now, when he needed them most, he found himself utterly mute. Outside, Manhattan roared on. Yellow taxis sped beneath neon lights, couples laughed on sidewalks, billboards blazed straight through the apartment windows. The world kept moving, not pausing a single second for the collapse of a millionaire. Jason let out a soft laugh through his tears. The sound was hollow, strangled, like a crystal glass cracking. For years he had believed himself the center of the universe. But in the end, the universe didn't even turn its head as he fell. The first morning in West Village opened like a new page in a book. Gentle sunlight streamed through the windows of the red brick townhouse, flooding every corner of the room. Emily stood in the middle of her new home, her hands still touched with pale green paint, gazing at the freshly finished nursery. On the walls, the soft colors looked like a promise of peace for the little life about to arrive. Amid the noise of Manhattan, this house felt like a quiet oasis made just for her and the baby. In the days that followed, Emily's rhythm of life changed completely. In the mornings, she spent hours in the nursery, carefully assembling the wooden crib she had chosen from a small shop on Bleecker Street. The sound of screws turning, the faint scent of new pine wood, and the sparrows chirping outside the window all blended together. In the afternoons, she slipped into a light-colored suit, left the townhouse, and headed to Whitman Group meetings. This time, Emily was no longer a shadow behind her husband, but the new vice chair, a position that even Jason, at the height of his power, had never imagined she could reach. The boardroom, once a place of torment, had become Emily's stage. She sat tall, eyes sharp, listening and asking precise questions. Directors who had grown used to Jason's arrogance now found reassurance in Emily's presence. Calm, practical, yet resolute. Each time she signed a document, she thought of the child she carried. Power was no longer a game, it was a shield to protect the future. Ryan Cole had become a familiar companion. He often stopped by the townhouse, carrying thick stacks of files, never forgetting to bring Emily a latte from the corner cafe. On autumn afternoons, they sat in the sunlit living room, discussing numbers while the bells of St. Luke's Church echoed in the distance. No longer rivals or saviors, a steady connection began to grow between them, nurtured by mutual respect and memories of their days at Harvard. Even so, Emily wasn't seeking a new love. She smiled when Ryan patiently explained complicated details in a report, but her heart didn't move in the way others might expect. What she longed for now was only stability, a home where her child could grow without fear, without confusion in the shadow of betrayal. Some nights, when the city outside was still blazing with light, Emily sat by the window, her hand resting on her belly, listening to the tiny heartbeat in the silence. Every small movement felt like encouragement, reminding her that every effort, every battle was worth it. From a betrayed wife, she had stepped into new roles: mother, leader, and above all, the master of her own destiny. Yet even as the new light poured in, one shadow remained unresolved. Jason, the man who had once stood at the peak and now drowned in his downfall, had not spoken his final word. Emily knew there was still one conversation left. Not in a boardroom, not before the press, but between two people who had once called each other husband and wife. A meeting that could decide everything: the child's future and the closing chapter of their long story. The small cafe on the corner of Lower Manhattan echoed with the clinking of spoons against cups, but no sound could cut through the heaviness of the moment. Jason appeared, gaunt and withered, his wrinkled shirt carrying none of the luxury it once did. His sunken eyes and disheveled hair made him look like a shadow of himself as he sat across from Emily. He confessed in a hoarse voice, "I've lost everything, but please, don't let our child lose a father." The words dropped onto the table like a small stone, sending ripples that were hard to tell apart: truth or desperation. Emily listened, her gaze calm, no longer burning with anger, only carrying the clarity of someone who had already survived the worst of pain. She replied, her voice gentle but firm, "You are still the father, but you must learn to start over from zero. Fatherhood has to be proven through actions, not words." It wasn't a sentence, but a final piece of advice, a fragile rope for a man who had already fallen into the abyss. Jason lowered his head. In that moment, he no longer resembled the millionaire who once dominated parties, but just a stripped-down man sitting in the dim cafe light, clinging to what little role he had left. Emily did not turn her back on him, but she did not save him either. That was no longer her responsibility. As she stood up, Emily left behind her half-finished latte, the coffee streaking down the glass like punctuation marking the end of a long chapter. She stepped outside, the late afternoon sunlight casting gold on her hair, one hand resting gently on her belly. The baby kicked softly, like an affirmation of a new beginning. Outside, Manhattan was still loud. The honking cars, the laughter of passers-by, the calls of street vendors. To Emily, the sounds no longer felt chaotic, but like background music for her rebirth. From a betrayed wife, she had transformed grief into strength, betrayal into justice, and tears into the foundation of a brighter future. The board of directors now looked at her differently, no longer with pity, but with respect. Employees at the company whispered and called her the woman who turned an empire around. And in West Village, the nursery, painted in a gentle green, had become a symbol of her quiet victory, the triumph of a mother who refused to let her child grow up in the shadows of deceit. The lesson left behind did not lie in numbers or titles, but in choices. Emily had proven that sometimes the greatest power doesn't come from noise, but from those who rise quietly. When they stand, they can turn the course of an empire. And the sweetest justice is not destruction, but rebuilding from the shards of betrayal.